Donna Ladd, the editor of the Mississippi Free Press, and as always, my co-host and co-founder of the Mississippi Free Press, our publisher Kimberly Griffin, is here. And we're kind of back after a little hiatus, and we're really excited about that. We've been doing some great work, and I've been thrilled to have been working with my now, I think, 20-year friend on our race violence project recently, and a recent entry. Keith Beauchamp is here with us. And Keith is a filmmaker, and he's a Louisiana man. And I met him, I think it's true, like almost 20 years ago when we sponsored a viewing of the Emmitt Till documentary, the poster that's over his shoulder there. And I've had one of those signed posters in the Jackson Free Press newsroom ever since then. So welcome. We're so happy to have you here tonight, Keith.
Thank you so much for having me, Donna and Kimberly.
So what I want you to do is just tell us, just start out giving people a few details about who you are. Tell us a little bit more, coming from Louisiana, whatever you want to tell us that we need to know about you.
Well, I think a little background on myself would be helpful. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I found my way into activism by way of the story of Emmitt Till. I was at 10 years old in my parents' study one day, and I was rumbling through old magazines they used to keep for me, not just for me, but my sister and I, old black vintage magazines. And I came across a Jet magazine. And I opened this magazine up, and on one side of the page, there's this angelic face of this young boy, sort of a mirror image of myself at that time. And then there's this, on the other side of the page, there was this horrific face of this monster, and I just didn't understand what I was looking at. And as I stared at the pages, I could recall my mother and father walking by the study, and they looked in on me, and they saw me with my mouth open. My mother walks in, and she looks over my shoulder, and she discovers that, of course, I'm looking at the photograph of Emmitt Till, and she calls over my father, and he also sees the same thing. And they both looked at each other and said, "We need to tell him the story." So at that moment, they told me the story of Emmitt Till the way they learned it. And throughout my life, the name Emmitt Till kept resurfacing. When I got into high school, I was interracially dating. And the first thing my parents would tell me before I left the house at night was, "Don't let what happened to Emmitt Till happen to you." So it became this boogeyman story to teach me about the racism that still exists in this country today, and at that time in particular, the South. But the name kept resurfacing. And as I got older, 2 weeks before my high school graduation, I had a real run-in with racism that actually changed my life. I was actually assaulted by an undercover police officer for dancing with a white classmate of mine. And that's what spurred me into wanting to fight injustice. But I felt the way that could be possible, the only way that could be possible, if I became a part of the system. So I began to study criminal justice at Southern University of Baton Rouge in hopes of becoming a civil rights attorney. But then in my junior year of college, I was introduced to filmmaking by my childhood friends who actually moved to New York City. And so when I was given that introduction, I asked my parents to allow me to sit out for a semester. And I told them if it didn't work out, I would go back to school and complete school as planned and go to law school. And one day I was at a company meeting, at our company meeting, production office, and I was asked if there was a story that you would want to tell, what would that be? And of course, the name Emmitt Till came up. And so that's how my journey began. I've been on this odyssey for quite some time. I was able to work with the late Mrs. Mamie Till Mobley, Mother Mobley is what I call her. And when she came into my life, she became this huge inspiration for me to fight justice, fight injustice, but fight for justice for Emmitt Till. And so, wow, I'm just thinking, Donna and Kimberly, it's amazing because, you know, in the introduction, Donna, you mentioned 20 years. I was a little kid back then. I would consider myself, you know, not knowing what my place in society would be. But when I got hold of this story, it changed my life tremendously. And of course, ultimately, it led to me producing the documentary, The Untold Story of Emmitt Lewis Till, which was the defining factor in the reopening of the case in 2004. But before that even happened, it's just ironic that I'm sitting before you today, and we will be talking a little bit about the Till movie later. I started off trying to produce a feature film on this case. I didn't try to produce a documentary. You know, I wrote a screenplay that was ended up being optioned off by producers at Showtime, and they set on the project. And that's what forced me to do the documentary. But I'm glad things went the way it did, because it forced me to go into the Delta of Mississippi and just, you know, interview anyone that I could at the time about the tragedy of, the murder of Emmitt Till. Many who didn't ever, well, I should say who didn't ever, but many who had not at the time spoke publicly to anyone. And so the film took me 9 years to produce. A lot of people ask that question, why? The question being, took 9 years to get people to talk to me, to get them to trust me. And of course, when they opened up, the floodgates opened, and information was coming to me nonstop. And that's what ultimately led me to gather enough evidence to bring forward that prompted the reopening of the case in 2004.
I think you and I are either exactly the same age or I'm a year older. I'm not sure. But I think in Mississippi, kind of Emmitt Till is this hovering presence in our lives as a kid. There's, you know, I've always known about Emmitt Till. I didn't know exactly what happened until I was much older. But I knew basically the outline of the story. And I would imagine that in the states that neighbor Mississippi, there's that same kind of hovering presence of Emmitt Till. One of the things I've noticed in the last, I don't know, you tell me, couple years, is there were two things that I've seen happen. There's this resurgence in the story of younger people trying to understand the story. It's showing up in our art. It was in Lovecraft country. Michael K. Williams, may rest in peace. It's showing, it's showing up in young people's art. It's showing up in there asking more questions. At the same time, people who hate, is the only way I can describe these people, are assaulting the memory, assaulting memorials, assaulting the dead. That's a scary place to be when you feel the need as a person to assault a person who was murdered in their memorial, their grave sites. We see this over and over again. Why do you think all of that is happening right now? Have you thought about it?
Of course. And it's a great question, Kimberly. It's just ironic that we continue to hear Emmitt's name over and over again. And I have to say it's because we haven't received justice in his case.
Right.
Emmitt Till and I hate to use this, I know a lot of people would jump on me for using this analogy, but I break it down in this manner for people to truly understand. Emmitt Till is Anne Frank, or is the Anne Frank of Black America. His murder serves as a reminder of grave injustice, as well as hope and change, because it was the change that came out of the murder of Emmitt Till that sparked the Black resistance of the movement, which later became the Civil Rights Movement. And so when you put it in the story in its proper context, you shouldn't be shocked about hearing his name time and time again. And so that is what's happening. when you see young black and brown, or just black and brown people being slaughtered on the streets of America at the hands of law enforcement, you can't help but think of Emmitt Till and the grave injustice. And that's why his name continues to surface, or metaphorically come back into fruition when these murders occurred, because we see Emmitt Till in them. They are the Emmitt Tills of this generation.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm one of these people, you know how you get a show and you try to make everybody you love watch it? Like, I'm trying to make everybody watch Lovecraft Country. I'm like, you have to watch it so we can talk about it. So, I remember sitting there going, wow, I was really proud, but also like, why are we still talking about this? So switching just a little bit, why do you think 1955 was so horrific for white terrorism? Because it was all over, I always like to point this out.
Yes.
It was all over the nation. It wasn't just in the South. So it's always,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, the Mississippi Delta was a different beast. I should say Mississippi and the Mississippi Delta was a different beast. Different from other states.
Right.
You have to look at the fact of the landmark decision that was made in 1954, which was Brown versus Board of Education, ending segregation in public schools. When this announcement was actually made, the answer to that by white supremacists was the formation of the Citizens Council. And of course, the Citizens Council, if your listeners don't understand what the Citizens Council is, you may have heard it by the name White Citizens Council, but they were considered to be the Uptown Klan. Let's just put it in layman terms. But these were businessmen who fought against integration in this country. And so it's not just integration, but they fought against voters registration for African Americans and people of color. Everything that breathed civil rights, they were against. And so as a response to the landmark decision made in 1954, they vowed to bring a reign of terror throughout the state of Mississippi, in particular, the Delta. And of course, you heard of the Trinity Killings, and you may not have heard it from that term, but there's a term that is used in the Delta, the Trinity Killings, you will hear people say. And that the Trinity Killings are the murders, the assassinations that took place in the summer of 1955. The first was Reverend George W. Lee out of Belzoni, Mississippi. He was the vice president of the Regional Council of Negro Leadership, an organization that was founded by Dr. T.R.M. Howard of Mount Bayou. And he was also an NAACP leader at the time. He was also the first registered Black voter in Humphreys County. And on his way home, after a speaking engagement, he was assassinated. He was shot and killed for his activities. So you have his murder take place on May 7, 1955. And right after his murder, 2 weeks before Emmitt's arrival in Mississippi, you have the murder of Lamar Didley Smith out of Brookhaven, Mississippi. Lamar Smith was an activist. He was a friend of Dr. T.R.M. Howard and Reverend George Lee. Many people don't really know that. He was also affiliated with the Regional Council of Negro Leadership. He was a businessman as well. And he was shot and killed on August 13th on the courthouse lawn in broad daylight for trying to register Black voters. At the time, he was handing over absentee votes in a very controversial primary that was coming up. And so he is shot and killed. 3 men were arrested, but they were also acquitted I shouldn't even say they were acquitted because they didn't even serve any time or was brought to jail. But 3 men were arrested, but they went before a grand jury, and an all-white grand jury, of course, acquitted them. And so that take place in 1955, 2 weeks before Emmitt Till's arrival. So this is the atmosphere Emmitt Till is walking into. And of course, on August 28th, he meets his fate at the same time because of this overbearing, racial tension that was going on throughout the Delta and Mississippi in general. But what was significant about the Emmitt Till case was the fact that when Emmitt Till was murdered, he instantly became the poster child to the anti-lynching movement. And so I like to explain this in this manner because I have failed of doing so in the past, and many of my friends who are scholars have failed to do so in the past, in actually putting Emmitt Till's story in its rightful context in history. So when Emmitt becomes the poster child to the anti-lynching movement, there's no one fighting against, this movement. Everyone decides to support this. Labor unions, civil rights organizations, not just the NAACP, many others. Everyone galvanized behind these efforts. And the reason why I'm explaining this to you in this manner as well is because we're dealing with the same exact thing now. If you look at the backdrop of 1955, which was an election year, and look at what was going on in the last couple of years in this country and even now, then you will see sort of a mirror image to the social injustice that we were faced with then and that we're continuing to face with now. And so this is also another reason why we continue to hear Emmitt Till's name or even the year 1955, because it was the most vicious year that took place here in America.
I'm old, so I always say Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education, because that's how I learned it.
Yes.
It's interesting because one of the things I think Justice Sonia Sotomayor came to our book festival a couple of years ago, and she said that one of the things she thinks is the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues we're dealing with right now, is lack of historical context is not being taught in schools, and civics. She was like, you can almost track the civics and the downplaying of history being pulled out of schools to people on both sides of the aisle not understanding how government works. So and how right. So she was like, it's and she said she said we in America we double down on stuff. We got to do STEM, but we can't do anything else. We got to do STEAM and we can't do anything else. She's like, so we create these people and we're losing liberal arts schools where people are taught how to think. So you end up losing kind of this way to critically think about things, to look at a news story and realize it's complete BS and not from a news source. We don't have that skill set. But I went off on a tangent. Another thing I think it's important is right now I see people who are far removed from historical events. So, for example, I remember when people had chickenpox. I remember people got really sick and almost died because the vaccine was pretty good, but wasn't perfect yet. And it was the vaccine. I still got chickenpox. I just didn't get really sick. But I also had relatives that had polio. And I think one of the things we're seeing with some young people is they are so far removed from what has actually happened, which is why they don't understand why vaccines are so important, or they don't understand. I always tell people, go look at the private school you think about sending your child to and see if it was founded in 1954, 55, 56, 50, something. And just think about it. Just think about it. It doesn't say no, but you at least need to know where you are. Right. And because my parents saw those schools, my father watched people take desk out of the school and drive them off to the private schools from the public school.
Oh,
like watch them do it. Like was looking out the window as a school teacher and was like, what are they doing? And take them to the so it's just kind of an interesting time, because a lot of what we're seeing are people think we thought we were post-racial because they kind of didn't have, because of whatever experience they were having. But anyway, that was my tangent.
Well,
I just wanted to chime in.
Understandable. It's just amazing because, we having this conversation is a very important conversation. And I'm always on the forefront and speaking out about these social issues, not only from the present, but in particular the past. I truly believe, and I'm sure you guys support, of course, my belief as well, that if we forget our past, history will repeat itself. And that's what's happening right now. And so we have to continue to educate not only the young, the old as well. They need to be reminded of the troubling past that we had gone through, and of course, our civil rights struggle. Because if we understood that, if we truly understood the importance of these social ills that we're fighting, remember those social ills, then you would know that things basically cosmetically changed, but the fight is still the same. We're still fighting the same social ills. There's nothing different than today. The only thing that's different about today is technology. And so there's so much information at our fingertips.
Right.
But what's going to inspire young people to get up and older, our elders too, those who have forgotten how to fight? What's going to get them interested enough to get them back in the game, or to get them in the game? And that's what's important. Civil rights struggle is a long struggle. When you choose, and I'm sure you guys understand, when you choose a life of activism, it doesn't necessarily come with a paycheck, and it's not a glamorous job.
Right.
But it takes particular people to take on this mission, I should say, right? Take on this mission to carry on, because not everyone is made to fight in the way that we're fighting. So again, education, re-education. We have to educate the public. And that's why I do the films that I do. If you look at my body of work, it all deals with social injustice and those who came before us, because there's so much for us to learn from them.
Keith, I didn't say at the top that you are a member of our advisory board at the Mississippi Free Press. Yes. And the reason, well, here's the thing. The reason I invited you to be on the advisory board is precisely what you're talking about. It's this need to do this race violence work, this history work, and, unpack it so that people understand it, right? And also, listening to you, I was thinking about, even when we do know, a lot of people know Emmitt Till died at this point, but we can still see it episodically, as a bad thing that those, you may have seen me say in the past, those crazy cluckers over there in the corner who didn't have anything to do with us did. Of course, I'm saying that as a white person. And what has struck me, and even, let me get all this out. Like, I was just working on this Lamar Smith story that came out, and as you know, because I was texting you constantly and using your work and using your film, and we were doing things together. I mean, I made you work to be the advisory board member, like in the last few weeks. That's for sure.
You made me work. That's stuff that I love to do.
We were doing this. But the reason I bring that up right here is that I have studied this stuff a lot at this point, but it wasn't really until I worked on that piece that I understood the connections really well between those murders in that you talked about those three murders in 1955 in Mississippi. You know, it wasn't until I really dug into the Lamar Smith case that I understood that it was 2 weeks before Emmitt Till was killed, and it was, what was it, like 2.5 months after George Lee was killed.
George Lee, yep, May 7th.
And that these, and I know a lot about the Citizens Council, as you know, but to put all that into the same timeline, that they were right then going around the state making these, these crazy speeches about how people didn't have to follow the law. The night before Lamar Smith was killed on that courthouse lawn, James Eastland, the senator, got a book about him right back here, right? Gave this fiery speech the night before, not in that town, but the newspapers were all over these things. So it was, what I'm getting at here is that what I think is missing for too many people is the connecting the dots in a systemic way of what this terrorism was trying to do and accomplish. Not only to be brutal and evil and violent toward Black people and particularly Black men, but that there was this overall plan to it. And I want you to, this is my question, I want you to explain that to us a little bit better. Like what, wasn't the Klan at that moment. They were kind of died down at that moment. It was the Citizens Council. So talk a little bit, take us there a little bit systemically in what was happening then and going forward.
Well, I mean, it's like the best way I describe it is by describing them as the Uptown Klan. They were members of people in your community, influential people in your community who joined the Citizens Council, who wanted to hold on to the Southern mores and their beliefs. And so one of the interesting things you mentioned, we talked about Brookhaven, Mississippi, where Reverend George Lee was murdered, but we did not mention that one of the leaders of the Citizens Council, Tom P. Brady, who actually gave the Black Monday speech in 1954, actually right outside of Greenwood, Mississippi. And it was a fiery speech talking about, the need to have control of the state, keeping the state a free state, which meant that no outside influences could come in to intervene. And like I said, these are people with money. And I'm bringing up the money for a particular reason because, one of the things that, I discovered was the fact that there were a lot of communication between our former president, Donald Trump, Cindy Hyde-Smith, and her family. The people in the Delta, in particular, members of the Citizens Council, many were wealthy. And a lot of the support for this ideology and the candidates that actually ran that time during that day was supported by those with the money. They always tell you, follow those with the money, you get the answers, right? You get to uncover some things, and that is true in this case. I do have to say, I was shocked to see the connections, and it did not trigger until Cindy Hyde-Smith was running for the Senate, and she was the last senator to receive a seat. And of course, she made this controversial comment about attending I shouldn't say a modern day lynching, but a lynching. And she never apologized. And I was wondering why she didn't apologize. And as I read deeper, about the comment and where she was from, the word Macedonia came up. Macedonia Baptist Church came up. And I recall during the time I was investigating the Lamar Smith murder in Brookhaven, I was warned to not go to Macedonia on my own, by myself, I should say, because it was possibly a dangerous place. This is where the White Citizens Council was formed in this area as well. So you have all these different things that are taking place. The murder of Lamar Smith, the formations of of the Citizens Council, as well as other white white terrorist organizations at the time. Macedonia was also known for a lot of Klan activity. And so these are things that I read along the way, but I never saw or even thought about a connection of Cindy Hyde Smith and the murderers, her husband, Mike Smith, and the murderers themselves until she made that comment. And so it forced me to look at the evidence that I brought forward. I shouldn't say the evidence, but the information that I was able to retrieve through the FBI, working with the FBI, and also interviewing people. After I gathered those materials, I realized that there's a connection. And actually, I know we don't have that long of a time tonight, but I'm actually seeing a connection with all these three, well, I shouldn't say all these three murders, but these three murders that actually took place in 1955. And that's Lamar Smith, Reverend George Lee, and of course, Emmitt Till. Because Lamar Smith and Reverend George Lee both were assassinated by members of the Citizens Council, those who were affiliated in the Citizens Council. When you go to Emmitt Till, the Citizens Council had their hands on the jury. They actually called them every night to make sure that they were going to make the decision to acquit the men. And so you also had the raising of funds for Roy Brown and J.W. Milo's defense, which was spearheaded by members of the Citizens Council. So there's a number of things that I'm steady researching that I hope that we all are able to unravel. But that's something to look at because we don't really understand these organizations at that time and their overall mission to keep the state of Mississippi and the South, because it wasn't just Mississippi where the Citizens Council rose. In Louisiana, where I'm from, there was the Southern Gentlemen. And so all these organizations wanted to keep the ideology of the Confederacy and to make sure that these states remain free states where Northerners could not come and intervene into whatever they so desired to do. One of the interesting things, and I'm sitting here, I'm sorry, as we're talking, I'm thinking, and
it's good.
Talked about this in a while because it's been quite a few murders that I've worked on since, fortunately, since Lamar Smith and Reverend George Lee and Till. But I'm just thinking about all the information that's there. We're talking about the Citizens Council, but we haven't even talked about the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission and those organizations that was put into existence by Mississippi tax dollars to counter integration. And so there's this whole system and ideology that we still have to uncover and unravel for people to understand. When you're up north, a lot of my northern brothers and sisters, and this is not a strike at them, they have no knowledge of these organizations ever existing. They only think of the Klan. And so this is why it's so important that we go back and educate and re-educate ourselves, because some of these organizations, although they're not visible, a lot of them still exist in some fashion.
Well, I would say, gosh, you said so much there, but I'll say a couple things really fast here. One thing, it's a really important point that I did not fully understand until fairly recent years in my own, reporting, that the Klan was just kind of one group among a whole lot.
And
it's all kind of been reframed, what you're talking about, into the Klan was the violent group and the Citizens Council was the group that boycotted. Both of those things are true, but it is also true that the Citizens, I mean, Beckwith was in the Citizens Council who murdered Medgar Evers. He was also in the Klan. That was common. The difference tended to be is that the Citizens Council were the men with more money and the leaders in their communities. And I write about in that article that we were flashing up there about Lamar Smith, I write about this idea that that they were pretending they needed deniability in the Citizens Council with Tom Brady and these others, so that they could pretend that they weren't calling for violence. They would say in one sentence that they weren't calling for violence, and in the next sentence say, this is my article, that, well, I can kind of understand a Klansman, but I'm against violence. So they were making it okay when you have the leaders in your community. There were also groups, and I really want people to know this, there were groups, the Americans for the Preservation of White Race started in Mississippi and was a horrendous group. And during that time, and a lot of people, you know, that's a bad group people should know about. In that area around Brookhaven and Pike County and other places, this vigilante group called White Caps, what I write about a little bit in this piece. There were the Knights of the White Camellia out of Louisiana. I mean, we could go on and on and on about how many white terrorist groups there were. And so I hate to tell people that because it's horrible and your head may explode, kind of like mine did when I realized how many there were. The Red Shirts, the White Leagues here in Mississippi. But people need, that's the history. I mean, this state, I haven't found a county yet that didn't have lynchings, and I doubt you have either. And so it was bad, and it was for systemic reasons and power and money and all of these things that were going on. And I do think that's, people need to know that, because what, you know, we believe in and what our journalism is about, and I know you agree with this, is we have to show people how the systems worked. So they can't just say it was that old redneck Klansman that did that, when their father and grandfather was standing up, making that violence okay, like all those people did in Brookhaven. Dozens of people on the courthouse lawn, as your great documentary on Lamar Smith showed, and none of them would testify in 2 different grand juries. None of them. The sheriff knew that it's Noah Smith, who is buried in Macedonia Baptist Church Cemetery, as I talk about in the article, where the Smith family that you're talking about are very strong. So all of that, it's not conspiracy theory stuff. I mean, it's really, well, they were, it's not theory, it was conspiracy, you know, and that's, I think that's one way to put it. So I don't know what my question is in that, Keith, but add whatever you want to that, and then we'll kick it back to Kimberly. You know, I'm super interested. So what do you, anything you want to add to that?
Well, no, I think you really laid out the importance of understanding the political and the social backdrop of that day. It's very important. You know, you know, whatever case I work on, there's something different. But in Mississippi is a second home to me. And I particularly took interest in Mississippi because I believe that Mississippi is ground zero for civil rights and many other movements that have taken place throughout this country. And so, you know, there's a very, very rich history here that I believe if the world knew, that we would not be longing for a movement. We would understand what it would take to produce a movement to move forward. And in this case, of course, the murder of Emmitt Till sparked the civil rights movement, which is very important to discuss. And I like to think people would understand this story, but not many people do. But if you did understand the story, if we could honestly say that the civil rights movement was the greatest movement ever produced by citizens of this country, then we must look at the story, the case that sparked it all. And of course, it was the murder of Emmitt Till. It's because of Till's murder that Rosa Parks decided not to get up from her seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It's because of Till's murder that pushed Dr. Martin Luther King, who was 26 years old at the time, forward to take on the Montgomery bus boycott. In fact, 4 days before Rosa Parks decided to get up from her seat, made that courageous act, she was sitting sitting in a church service. I should say a church service, but it was a Till rally that took place at Dexter Baptist Church, which was officiated over by a young 26-year-old Dr. King. And of course, the person who was speaking and who was speaking out about the injustice that befell Emmitt Till was Dr. T.R.M. Howard. That moment actually inspired Rosa Parks to make sure, I shouldn't say make sure, but inspired her to not get up from her seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It was that moment where she made that decision that she would press forward with the movement. So, you know, we look at these murders sometimes and we think these things doesn't really affect us, and you know, it only touches the family, and you know, we shouldn't worry about them. But the movements in which we've been longing for, the movement in which we've been longing for, it's only going to happen if we truly understand. I hate to say this, racial progression has only happened through the blood, sweat, and death of the Black body. We only seen racial progression.
Right.
And so when you understand that, and when you see what's happening in the streets right now, the other Emmitt Tills that are out there, then you will begin to understand what must be done to press forward, to spark a new movement.
So there's so much there. There's so much there. There must be a question about how we reconcile the white terrorism with the idea that we're religious in Mississippi. I don't know if religion is the right word. We use Christianity
Yes.
to validate. I had to find the right words. And I am a Christian. I'm just not that kind of Christian. I think that should be, I would like my own line of MFP swag. I'm getting a t-shirt that just says, I'm a Christian. I'm not that kind of Christian. So people aren't scared of you. You always go, I'm not that kind of Christian. But we have created a Christianity not based on the Bible that validates our behavior. And that validates our hatred, that validates our being subjugation and misogyny. It validates slavery. It validated slavery. It validated the separation of the races. It validates our irrational patriotism. I'm also a patriot, but not that kind of patriot. It's just all these things that it does. Can you talk about what you've seen woven in as you've studied and investigated and learned?
Well, you triggered me when you brought up Christianity, in particular when you're dealing with these cases. You also mentioned reconciliation, right? Racial reconciliation. Donna and I know a lot about that because we attended so many Truth and Reconciliation committee meetings and stuff back in the day. And I had to grow. I started when I was 22 years old investigating the Emmitt Till murder. I am 50 years old now, made 50 this year. I did not understand the terrain or the path that I was taking at the time. And so I grew up understanding the importance of getting justice done. When Emmitt Till's case was reopened, I was brought into a very rare relationship with the FBI to assist them on other civil rights crimes that had taken place during all the way from the 1940s from the 1940s all the way to 1969. And that was under their Civil Rights Cold Case initiative, which was inspired by myself and the reopening of the Till case, because they realized that we could go back and revisit a number of these cases and perpetrators as well as witnesses may be alive. And so the whole effort, we were giving 130 some more cases on the first list that we received to look at, to see, go after these cases, to reinvestigate them, to see if they warrant new investigations as well as prosecutions. And so that's the activism, I almost said the activism side. That's my, I guess, my workflow side. I had to assist them because I felt I was in a position to really get justice for many of these families. Right. I covered a lot of information with a lot of these cases, but what hurts me most is the fact that in many of these cases, many of the family members know that it's a long shot in getting courtroom justice. I have watched time and time again members of families who lost their loved ones having to conform and having to agree with the term of reconciliation or racial reconciliation. But we must understand there can never be any racial reconciliation without truth and justice. So there's a lot of families out here who are suffering, who lost their loved ones during the civil rights struggle, who basically feel like they lost them yesterday. They want to see justice done, but the way the wheels of justice have rolled throughout, the country and throughout these years, it forces us, especially the elders who had been fighting, who had this fire in their belly from the beginning, but now they're slowing down and having to accept and conform, or to accept what's given to them by local and state authorities when it comes to their loved ones' cases. I'm just from the cloth, and thank God I had a great mentor like Mother Mobley, who instilled in me the value for speaking for those who can no longer speak for themselves. She was so frustrated at the time of Emmitt's death that she was receiving all these news, media. She was receiving so much media attention when she knew other families were suffering, just as much or even more than she was at that time. And so one of the things I promised her, she made me promise her, was that after Till that I would work on all these other cases, and that's what I've been doing. And that's why I'm before you today. But I just long for a moment in time where we don't have to accept what is given to us. We shouldn't accept it. It pains me to see these elders who've been fighting for justice no longer feel that justice is attainable. And so, it's just a frustrating thing. I'm sorry, Kimberly, I'm rambling, and Donna.
Well, I think what I was thinking was, and I think you touched upon this, was people using religiosity, because I think I may have cut out on your end, and Christianity as a weapon. That was because we Mississippi loves to call itself a Christian, loves to use Christianity as a weapon against people. But there is an arm of the Christian church, which you were talking about, Sister Rosa, that is the complete opposite of that and is about social justice. It's the Black church, or allies of the Black church, who are advocates and empowered and face death. But you're
speaking of theology, liberation, and of course we have all these domestic white terrorist organizations always stand behind the cross and the Bible. But we went through that during colonialism, right? During the colonial times. I mean,
Right.
It came with the gun, as one would quote, right? And a pistol. Well, they came with the gun and the Bible in the other hand.
That's right.
And so it's unfortunate that we have people who are hiding behind the banner of Christianity when we know that it's not Christian. And so it triggered me when you said it. I knew exactly what you wanted me to speak on, but it triggered me, and I'm
No, it was
frustrated at the
good.
moment because we're still fighting for justice in the Emmitt Till case. And I have watched those who are on the front lines of fighting for justice now just conforming and accepting, what is. And then everyone comes back and asks the question, right? Why Emmitt Till's name keeps resurfacing over and over again. Why can't we stop talking about Till? Well, the reason being, of course, we have not received justice.
Right.
Well, it probably goes without saying that I went to a very different church than what you're talking about, Kimberly, with liberation.
Thank God.
The church that ran me off in Neshoba County because of racism and sexism was the Baptist church there. So I was actually very relieved as an adult to be exposed to churches that and people of faith who were not those same people, and gave me hope for that. So that's just kind of my editorial on that point. I do feel like I got to ask you about Till, the film.
Sure.
The one thing that struck me, you said early in this conversation that you were trying to do a feature film early on, and it wasn't, you couldn't sell it, or whatever. It didn't happen.
It's an option.
Yeah. But what I thought when you said that was, well, maybe that was a good thing, because when we see all of these kind of whitewashed films like Mississippi Burning, or
you're talking about my partner. Stop.
Oh, I know. Was that Fred? I thought I picked one that wasn't his film, so let me stop. Sorry, Fred.
No, that's fine.
So,
no, he understands. I think
he gets that, though. I think what we're talking about, but you know what I mean. You're doing the film now, so it's got to be very different than it would have been 20 years ago by the time it made
absolutely. I mean, the only reason why Fred was able to get Mississippi Burning and Ghost of Mississippi done was the fact that you had what they call the white saviors, in the film. And so Hollywood has changed. Filmmaking has changed. I mean, in terms of independent filmmaking, has changed a little bit. I have to say a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it was a struggle to get this film made by a studio when we were actually trying to do it independently of a studio first. But we needed the studio money to do this. And so you're right in many ways. I am so happy that my original feature Until was optioned off by producers who worked with Showtime who didn't know what to do with it. They shelved the project. They took the project away from me for like 2 years. I was binded to a contract. So I was forced to do the documentary. I won't say forced, but I was encouraged to do the documentary by Mother Mobley, because I was going into the Delta doing these interviews, and I was capturing them on tape to take those interviews home to write the screenplay. That's all I was doing. And so when you look at the untold story of Emmitt Till, it wasn't highly produced. It was me on the ground meeting people, and as I met them, I would convince them to talk to me then and there, and I would tape and film them. I would film them at that time. So all these tapes of interviews that I used to craft this original screenplay, eventually became the sources as well as, the elements for the documentary, The Untold Story of Emmitt Till. It was truly, I felt, wasn't just me taking interviews. I was actually taking depositions because I didn't know when I left these witnesses that I've interviewed if they were going to be around long enough to see this case go to the courtroom. And so we did it. We got it to the courtroom. And of course, the system failed us. And so now that the case has been reactivated since 2017, we're still fighting to get justice done in Emmitt Till's name.
Well, tell me a little bit, just a little bit here at the end. I know you can't talk a lot about the film.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You're about to start filming. Give us like what you can say about this new big feature film.
Donna, it's a blessing in my 27-year career of trying to produce this film that is finally being produced now. It's also a blessing that I was not only able to tell one story about Emmitt Till, I'm telling two. Both is, I told a story went to theaters. Now this film, Till, is going to theaters, directed by Chinoya Chiku, produced by myself, Fred Zolo, Barbara Broccoli, Thomas Levine, and Michael Riley. And so we have a great cast that was announced. Danielle Deadwyler, Jalen Hall. Danielle Deadwyler would be playing Mother Mobley. Jalen Hall would be playing Emmitt Till. There's a lot of updating information will come out soon. I wish I could talk a lot about it. But the greatest thing is that people have tried to produce this film since 1955. Mother Mobley had 2 deals, television and a film deal at that time, trying to produce a movie on her son. Both films were canned and shut down. Over the years, you had people like Steven Spielberg and others who have come forward to produce a film of this nature. If you want to see something interesting, Rod Sterling, I mean, we're all Rod Sterling fans, right? We all love Twilight Zone. But did you know the creation of the Twilight Zone came from the frustration that Rod Sterling had when he was not able to produce a Till movie on television? He was trying. So it's amazing when you look at the stories. If you look at the history, you will see the fight to get this film made along with the fight to get justice. So I am in the same position that I was when I first started producing the documentary. At the time, the documentary led to the reopening of the case before the film was even released. I was working with the FBI and Justice Department on the investigation. The same thing is happening now here. The case is still open, it's reactivated, and now I'm doing the Till movie. So I'm just hoping that, we would be able to wake the sleeping giant of people, good-minded people who want to see justice done, who want to see, injustice stalled. And I should say this, perfect. I'm a quote man. If you follow me, Keith does quotes every single day. So I get my inspiration from. And as I'm speaking, I think about the long road of justice, of fighting for justice and fighting for civil rights. And Amiri Baraka said it best. There's no justice in America. It's the pursuit of justice that sustains you. And that's what continues to make us stand at the front lines and work. We know that it's a long road to get justice and to fight the racism that exists in this country. It's going to always exist. But, you have to do it. We have to do it. And it's that hope. It's that gives us that drive, that faith, and that hope that make us want to continue. And that is that same hope and the inspirations in my life, such as our elders who are still with us, who are part of SNCC, all those people, Donna, that we used to hang out with. I took that stuff for granted, but they all became a part of me. And which is why I continue to do what I'm doing, because I want to make sure that their lives and the work that they did wasn't in vain.
Well, you said that. I thought of Bob Moses teaching me, not to me, but speaking at the Mount Zion Church in Philadelphia, Mississippi, from where I'm from, and making the point that justice and freedom will always be a struggle. I mean, it's an old point, but he made it in such a way that made me understand it. And I think that reflects what you're just saying here. It's like that's the point, is that someone will always try to take it away or whatever. So it will always be a struggle in some way or another. But you know, you and I both, and Kimberly, we've met so many great people on these roads who are doing remarkable things. And you certainly had a huge impact on my life. I will tell you that. So I'm tickled that we're still kind of doing this and working together on this race violence project. And there's going to be a whole lot more coming in that project with your help, as much as I can squeeze it out of you as you're doing this film. But so appreciate you for Keith and for being here tonight and having this conversation with us. You're just so amazing.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And thank you both for providing the platform. And I know, you know, we get discouraged, especially now in the last few years. You know, I've suffered from racial fatigue. As you know, I had a television series I stepped away from to produce the feature film Until, because I feel like, you know, this is not just going to be a movie, it's going to be a movement. Mm-hmm. And I want to awaken that sleeping giant in us again, and it can happen. And so providing a platform like this, I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful to be your friend and to continue to help you, you know, as we fight the good fight, as they would say.
Well, thank you so much. And what do I have to say to take us out of here? By the way, we are a nonprofit media outlet at the Mississippi Free Press. So if you guys can throw a few dollars in our tip jar, and I won't get in trouble with Kimberly because I didn't mention it, you know, mfp.ms/donate. We appreciate it, and we appreciate all the support we've had in this year and a half so far, and especially these recent months of just incredible traffic and journalism, and what everybody out there is doing to help us do this kind of crazy project and journalism in the state of Mississippi. You guys cannot know how much we appreciate all of you and how you're helping us. Next week, we will be back at 6 p.m. and we're going to be talking to another advisory board member, Carla Vasquez, who is Jackson-based. She's a paralegal and an interpreter, and she works with her husband and Abigail Peterson, who's going to be here with her on immigration issues. She is a force of nature, yet another force of nature, and you guys really, she's a delight. So you guys please tune in and send us your questions for them, and they're going to be talking kind of just about concerns about immigration now, but also the impacts of COVID-19 on immigration, particularly in Mississippi. So we hope that all of you will join us for that show. And remember that this MFP Live is on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. And also we now have a podcast, which is on Apple, Spotify, and Simplecast. Awesome. And so you guys can download the whole show and hear more from Keith and listen to it again. And other than that, thank you guys so much. Appreciate you, Keith. Always appreciate my amazing partner in the MFP, Kimberly Griffin. And we will see all of you next week.